The old Admiral stood at his office window, watching young recruits struggle through their morning drills. His weathered hands traced the edge of his desk where a simple K-bar knife lay next to stacks of classified reports. Outside, the Pacific Ocean stretched endlessly, the same waters where he had earned his reputation as one of America's most lethal warriors. Admiral William McRaven had spent 37 years in the Navy, most of it in the shadows where heroes are made and legends are buried. Today marked his final day in uniform. Tomorrow, the most decorated SEAL in modern history would become a civilian. The irony wasn't lost on him that his greatest victory, the operation that made him a household name, had also sealed his fate. The knock on his door interrupted his thoughts. "Come in," he called, not turning from the window. Captain Rodriguez entered, carrying a manila folder thick with documents. "Sir, the final debrief reports from Neptune Spear. Everything's been declassified that's going to be." McRaven accepted the folder without opening it. He already knew what was inside. Mission reports, casualty assessments, political fallout analyses. What the papers couldn't capture was the weight of command, the burden of sending men into harm's way, or the sleepless nights that followed every operation. "Rodriguez, do you know why they call it a blade falling quietly?" McRaven asked, finally, turning from the window. The younger officer shook his head. "Because when a warrior's career ends, when he steps out of the shadows, nobody hears it coming. One day you're the tip of the spear, the next you're just another old man with stories nobody can hear." McRaven's mind drifted to 1977, when he was just another young officer fresh out of basic underwater demolition training. Back then, SEALs were still finding their place in the military hierarchy. They were the Navy's experimental unit, the crazy ones who jumped out of planes and swam through enemy harbors. Most senior officers thought they were more trouble than they were worth. His first real taste of combat came during the Iran hostage crisis in 1980. Operation Eagle Claw was supposed to be America's triumphant rescue of 53 hostages held in Tehran. Instead, it became a masterclass in how special operations could go catastrophically wrong. McRaven was a junior officer then, part of the planning team that watched their carefully crafted mission collapse in the Iranian desert. 8 Americans died when a helicopter collided with a transport aircraft during the evacuation. The mission was aborted before it truly began. McRaven stood in the briefing room afterward, listening to senior officers dissect every failure, every miscalculation. That night, he made a promise to himself: if he ever commanded men in combat, he would never send them into a mission that wasn't planned to perfection. The lesson stuck. Over the next decade, McRaven threw himself into studying special operations failures. He read every after-action report, interviewed every survivor he could find. While other officers focused on tactics and equipment, McRaven became obsessed with the tiny details that separate success from catastrophe. His reputation began building during the 1983 Grenada invasion. While regular Army units struggled with outdated maps and communication failures, McRaven's SEAL team executed a flawless nighttime assault on a radio tower. They demolished their target and extracted without a single casualty. It was textbook special operations, quick, violent, invisible. But Grenada was just practice. The real test came in 1989 with Operation Just Cause, the invasion of Panama. McRaven commanded a team tasked with capturing Panamanian leader Manuel Noriega's private airfield. Intelligence suggested Noriega might use the airfield to escape if the invasion went poorly. The mission required surgical precision. The airfield was surrounded by civilian housing, and any stray bullets could kill innocent families. McRaven spent weeks studying satellite photos, memorizing every building, every fence, every potential hiding spot. He drilled his men until they could navigate the target blindfolded. On December 20, 1989, McRaven's team fast-roped from helicopters into complete darkness. They had 15 minutes to secure the airfield before Panamanian forces could respond. What happened next would become legend in SEAL circles. The team moved like ghosts through the night. They neutralized sentries without firing a shot, using knives and bare hands. They disabled aircraft engines with small explosive charges, ensuring nothing could take off. When Panamanian reinforcements finally arrived, they found an empty airfield littered with their unconscious comrades and destroyed planes. McCraven's team had vanished back into the jungle, mission accomplished without killing a single enemy soldier. It was the kind of operation that made other special forces units jealous and senior officers take notice. But success in special operations is measured differently than conventional warfare. While regular units count territory captured and enemies killed, SEALs measure victory in objectives achieved and secrets kept. The best SEAL operations are the ones nobody ever hears about. Throughout the 1990s, McCraven led dozens of classified missions across the globe. He hunted war criminals in Bosnia, disrupted arms dealers in Africa, and tracked terrorists through the mountains of Afghanistan. Each mission added to his reputation within the tight-knit special operations community. His men called him the Blade because of his surgical approach to warfare. McCraven never used a sledgehammer when a scalpel would do. He studied his targets like a scientist, identifying weaknesses and exploiting them with minimal force. Other commanders might call in airstrikes or artillery. McCraven preferred sending a four-man team with knives and silenced weapons. The nickname stuck, even as McCraven climbed the ranks. By 2001, he was a full captain commanding Naval Special Warfare Group 1. When terrorists struck the World Trade Center and Pentagon, McCraven was one of the first officers called to the Pentagon for planning America's response. The meeting took place in a secure conference room deep beneath the building. Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld presided over a table full of generals and admirals, all eager to demonstrate their service's capabilities. When discussion turned to hunting down Osama bin Laden, most officers proposed massive conventional operations. McCraven raised his hand. "Sir, if I may suggest an alternative." Rumsfeld nodded for him to continue. "Special operations. Small teams, surgical strikes. We don't need to invade Afghanistan with 100,000 troops. We need to find one man hiding in a cave." The room erupted in objections. Army generals insisted only a large-scale invasion could guarantee success. Air Force officers argued for sustained bombing campaigns. Navy admirals pushed for carrier-based strikes. McCraven waited for quiet, then spoke again. "Gentlemen, we're not fighting the Wehrmacht. We're hunting individual terrorists hiding among civilians. This requires precision, not overwhelming force." Rumsfeld leaned forward. "What are you proposing, Captain?" "Give me 200 SEALs and Delta Force operators. Let us work with CIA intelligence assets. We'll find bin Laden and his lieutenants one by one. No collateral damage, no international incidents, no prolonged occupation." The proposal was radical for its time. The military establishment preferred conventional solutions to complex problems. But Rumsfeld was intrigued by McCraven's confidence and track record. "You really think you can find the world's most wanted terrorist with just 200 men?" McCraven's response would be quoted in special operations circles for years afterward. "Sir, I don't need 200 men to find Osama bin Laden. I need 200 men to make sure he doesn't see us coming." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Here was a Navy captain proposing to accomplish what intelligence agencies and conventional military forces had failed to achieve. The audacity was either brilliant or career suicide. Rumsfeld made his decision. "Draw up a detailed plan. You have 48 hours." McCraven spent the next 2 days crafting the blueprint for what would become the most successful manhunt in modern history. His plan emphasized intelligence gathering, local partnerships, and surgical strikes. Instead of hunting bin Laden directly, he proposed systematically dismantling al-Qaeda's network, capturing or killing key figures until bin Laden was isolated and vulnerable. The strategy worked. Over the next 10 years, McCraven's Special Operations Forces captured or killed hundreds of high-value targets. They rescued hostages in Somalia, hunted bomb makers in Iraq, and tracked terrorist financiers across multiple continents. Each operation refined their techniques and expanded their capabilities. But the ultimate prize remained elusive. Osama bin Laden seemed to vanish after the initial invasion of Afghanistan. For nearly a decade, he existed more as a ghost than a real person, appearing only in occasional video messages and intelligence reports. McCraven never stopped believing they would find him. While other commanders focused on conventional military objectives, he continued developing the intelligence networks and special operations capabilities necessary for the final hunt. By 2011, McRaven had been promoted to Admiral and commanded all special operations forces. His units had become the most elite military organization in American history, capable of operating anywhere in the world with minimal support and maximum effectiveness. Then, in late 2010, CIA analysts identified a suspicious compound in Abbottabad, Pakistan. The intelligence was fragmentary and circumstantial, but it pointed toward the possibility that bin Laden was hiding in plain sight, surrounded by Pakistani military facilities and civilian neighborhoods. McRaven studied the intelligence reports with the same methodical approach he had used throughout his career. The compound was large but not unusual for the area. It housed an extended family with limited outside contact. The residents burned their trash instead of putting it out for collection, suggesting they wanted to hide their activities. Most compelling was the presence of a tall man who never left the compound. Satellites occasionally glimpsed him walking in the courtyard, but he was always careful to stay under cover. The man's height and build matched bin Laden's profile, but positive identification was impossible without closer surveillance. President Obama asked McRaven for his assessment. Could Special Operations Forces assault the compound and capture or kill bin Laden with reasonable chance of success? McRaven's answer was characteristically direct. Mr. President, if Osama bin Laden is in that compound, my men will get him. The question is whether we can get out afterward. The admission of uncertainty surprised some in the room, but McRaven had learned from studying special operations failures. Honest assessment of risks was more valuable than false confidence. Obama appreciated the candor. What do you need to maximize our chances? Time to plan properly, sir. And authority to abort if the situation changes. The president granted both requests, setting in motion the most closely guarded military operation in recent history. As Admiral McRaven sat in his office on his final day of service, he reflected on the journey that had brought him from a young officer studying failure in the Iranian desert to the commander who finally brought justice to America's greatest enemy. Tomorrow, the blade would fall quietly, and the nation's deadliest seal would rise loudly into a new chapter of service. The secure briefing room beneath the Pentagon felt different in January 2011. Admiral McRaven stood before a wall-mounted screen displaying satellite images of a compound in Abbottabad, Pakistan. Around the table sat the most senior intelligence officials in America, their faces reflecting the gravity of what they were discussing. Leon Panetta, the CIA director, cleared his throat. Admiral, our confidence level is 60% that the target is in the compound. That's higher than we've had in years, but it's not definitive. McRaven studied the photographs carefully. The compound occupied nearly an acre, surrounded by 18-foot walls topped with barbed wire. No internet or phone connections. Minimal outside contact. Most telling was the presence of a family that burned their trash daily instead of putting it out for collection. 60% is enough to plan, McRaven replied. But not enough to execute. What's our timeline for better intelligence? Could be weeks, could be months, Panetta admitted. Our assets are limited in that area. McRaven nodded. He had spent 34 years in the military, most of it hunting high-value targets with incomplete intelligence. The key was preparing for multiple scenarios while continuing to gather information. I need to see the compound myself, he announced. Sir? The question came from General Cartwright, the vice chairman of the Joint Chiefs. Not literally. But I need a replica built where we can train. If we're going to assault that compound, my men need to know every wall, every room, every possible hiding spot. Within a week, construction crews working under tight security had built an exact replica of the Abbottabad compound at a classified training facility in North Carolina. The replica included accurate measurements of walls, buildings, and even landscaping. McRaven's planners had studied satellite imagery from multiple angles, calculating sightlines and potential obstacles. McRaven assembled his planning team carefully. These weren't just the Navy SEALs who would execute the mission, but intelligence analysts, communications specialists, medical personnel, and contingency planners. Every detail mattered when operating deep inside a foreign country without support. The team leader would be a SEAL commander known only by his call sign Cairo. McCraven had worked with Cairo for 8 years, watching him evolve from a promising junior officer into one of the deadliest operators in American Special Forces. Cairo combined tactical brilliance with ice-cold judgment under pressure. "Show me your approach," McCraven instructed during the first training exercise. Cairo's team fast-roped from helicopters onto the replica compound in complete darkness. They moved with practiced efficiency, clearing buildings room by room. The entire exercise took 18 minutes from insertion to extraction. "Too slow," McCraven declared afterward. "You're treating this like a training exercise." In Pakistan, those 18 minutes could bring the entire Pakistani military down on your heads. Cairo accepted the criticism without argument. "What's the time limit, Admiral?" 30 minutes maximum from crossing into Pakistani airspace until we're heading home. That gives you maybe 15 minutes on target. The timeline seemed impossible. The compound contained multiple buildings and dozens of rooms. A thorough search could take hours. But McCraven insisted on speed, understanding that their window of opportunity would be brief. Over the following weeks, Cairo's team refined their tactics. They practiced until each man knew exactly which building he would clear, which rooms were his responsibility, and where to position himself during the assault. They rehearsed medical evacuation procedures, equipment failures, and unexpected resistance. Most importantly, they drilled for the possibility that their target wasn't in the compound. McCraven insisted on contingency plans for every scenario, including the devastating possibility that they would risk everything for an empty building. "Gentlemen," he addressed the team after one particularly intense training session, "special operations succeed because we prepare for failure. Every backup plan, every contingency, every detail we perfect now could save your lives in Pakistan." The men nodded solemnly. They understood they were training for the most important mission of their careers, possibly the most significant special operations raid in history. Meanwhile, McCraven worked the political side of the operation. He briefed President Obama weekly on training progress and intelligence updates. The president asked detailed questions about risks, casualties, and potential international complications. "Admiral, what are the chances of bringing bin Laden back alive?" Obama asked during one briefing. McCraven considered the question carefully. "Sir, my men will attempt capture if possible. But, if he resists, or if they perceive any threat to American lives, they will shoot to kill. I won't ask them to take unnecessary risks for the sake of capturing rather than killing." Obama appreciated the honesty. Politicians might prefer live captures for intelligence value and public relations, but McCraven's primary responsibility was to his men, not to political considerations. As training continued, new intelligence filtered in from Pakistan. CIA assets confirmed that a tall man lived in the compound and rarely left the main building. The man's daily routine suggested extreme security consciousness. He never used electronic communications and received no visitors except family members. Most compelling was evidence of extensive security measures around the compound. Multiple layers of walls, reinforced doors, and carefully positioned guards suggested the residents had something valuable to protect. By April 2011, McCraven felt ready to present his final plan to President Obama. The briefing took place in the Situation Room, with the full national security team present. "Mr. President, we've identified 3 viable options," McCraven began, pointing to diagrams on the wall screen. "Option 1, airstrike. We can destroy the compound with precision-guided munitions. High probability of killing anyone inside, but no confirmation of target identity and significant collateral damage to surrounding buildings." Obama shook his head immediately. "Too many civilians in the area." Option 2, joint operation with Pakistani forces. We share intelligence and conduct the raid together. Lower political risk, but high probability of compromise before execution. "Not acceptable," the president replied. "We can't trust that information wouldn't leak." Option 3, unilateral special operations raid. Small team, helicopters, in and out before Pakistani forces can respond. Highest probability of target identification and minimal collateral damage. Obama leaned forward. What are the risks? McCraven had prepared for this question. Sir, we'll be operating without permission deep inside Pakistani territory. If something goes wrong, if we lose aircraft or personnel, it becomes an international incident. Pakistan could claim we violated their sovereignty, which technically we would be doing. What about your men? What are their chances? Based on our training and intelligence assessment, I'm confident in mission success. But special operations always involve risk. Equipment failures, unexpected resistance, bad weather, any of these could complicate the mission. Secretary of State Hillary Clinton raised her hand. Admiral, what happens if bin Laden isn't there? If we raid the compound and find some innocent Pakistani family? The question struck at McCraven's greatest fear. Madam Secretary, that would be catastrophic for American-Pakistani relations and my men would have risked their lives for nothing. But, based on current intelligence, I believe the probability of target presence is sufficient to justify the risk. President Obama studied the satellite photos spread across the table. After several minutes of silence, he looked up at McCraven. Admiral, if you were in my position, would you authorize this mission? McCraven met the president's gaze directly. Sir, I've spent my entire career hunting terrorists and war criminals. This compound represents the best intelligence we've had on bin Laden's location in nearly 10 years. If we don't act on this information, we may never get another chance. The president nodded slowly. I need to think about this. We'll reconvene tomorrow morning. That evening, McCraven returned to his office and called Cairo. How are the men? Ready, Admiral. They've been ready for weeks. Good. Stay ready. The decision comes tomorrow. McCraven spent that night reviewing every detail of the operation one final time. He studied building layouts, escape routes, weather forecasts, and contingency plans. By dawn, he had convinced himself that they had prepared as thoroughly as humanly possible. The next morning's briefing lasted only 15 minutes. President Obama had made his decision. Admiral McCraven, you are authorized to execute Operation Neptune Spear at your discretion. Time and weather conditions are your call. McCraven felt the weight of command settle on his shoulders. 34 years of training and preparation had led to this moment. Thank you, Mr. President. We'll bring him home. Admiral, Obama added as McCraven prepared to leave, bring all your men home too. The final preparations took place over a weekend in early May. McCraven's team deployed to a forward staging base in Afghanistan, where they conducted final equipment checks and weather assessments. The helicopters were specially modified stealth versions designed to evade Pakistani radar. On the night of May 1, 2011, McCraven stood in the operations center watching real-time feeds from the assault team's helmet cameras. President Obama and his security team watched the same feeds from the White House Situation Room. Cairo, this is Neptune Base. Weather window is optimal. Pakistani military activity is minimal. You are cleared for insertion. McCraven's voice remained calm, but his heart pounded as two helicopters disappeared into the darkness over Pakistan. After nearly 10 years of hunting, America's most wanted terrorist might finally face justice within the next hour. The helicopters flew low and fast across the Pakistani border, using terrain masking to avoid radar detection. McCraven watched their progress on satellite displays, counting down the minutes until they reached the target. Neptune Base, this is Cairo. Target compound in sight. Beginning insertion. The moment of truth had arrived. Everything McCraven had learned about special operations, everything his men had trained for, would be tested in the next 30 minutes. As the first helicopter approached the compound walls, McCraven whispered a prayer he had said before every dangerous mission of his career: bring them home safe. The hunt for Osama bin Laden was about to end, one way or another. The first helicopter encountered problems 30 seconds after crossing the compound wall. McCraven watched the live feed from his command center as the aircraft suddenly lost altitude, its rotor wash creating unexpected turbulence against the high walls. Neptune base, we have a mechanical issue, Cairo's voice crackled through the radio.
Bird 1 is going down hard. McCraven's blood pressure spiked, but his voice remained steady. Cairo, execute crash protocol.
Bird 2, adjust approach. The helicopter hit the ground inside the compound with a bone-jarring impact. For several seconds, the video feeds showed nothing but dust and chaos. McCraven held his breath, waiting to hear if his men had survived. Neptune base, Bird 1 is down but crew is mobile.
Beginning assault on foot.
Relief flooded through the command center. A crashed helicopter complicated everything, but at least the SEALs were alive and functional.
McCraven immediately shifted to contingency planning. Bird 2, adjust your insertion point. We need you covering the perimeter.
The second helicopter hovered outside the compound while Cairo's team moved through the dust cloud toward the main building. They had trained for this scenario dozens of times, but actually executing it in enemy territory with a downed aircraft behind them was entirely different.
President Obama's voice came through the secure line from Washington. Admiral, what's the situation?
Sir, we have one aircraft down but all personnel mobile and mission continuing. The crash timeline reduces our window, but we're still operational. Through the helmet cameras, McCraven watched his men breach the compound's main building. They moved room by room with practiced efficiency, their movements coordinated despite the chaos of the crashed helicopter.
Contact front. Gunfire erupted from inside the building.
McCraven watched muzzle flashes through the grainy video feed as his men engaged unknown targets.
The firefight lasted less than 30 seconds, ending when Cairo's voice cut through the radio chatter. Building secure. 2 military-age males down. Continuing search.
McCraven's palms were sweating despite the air conditioning in the command center.
Everything hinged on the next few minutes.
10 years of hunting, months of planning, and his men's lives all depended on what they found in that building.
Neptune base, this is Cairo.
We have precious cargo. The code word sent electricity through both command centers.
Precious cargo meant they had found their target.
McCraven leaned forward, studying the video feed that showed a tall figure lying motionless on the floor.
Confirm identity, McCraven ordered.
Cairo's team conducted field identification procedures they had practiced extensively. Height, facial features, distinctive markings. Everything matched the target profile they had memorized. Identity confirmed, Cairo reported.
Jackpot. Repeat, jackpot.
McCraven allowed himself one moment of satisfaction before shifting back to extraction mode.
Outstanding. Begin sensitive site exploitation. You have 10 minutes before exfiltration.
The SEALs worked quickly to collect computers, documents, and electronic devices that might contain intelligence about Al-Qaeda operations. They photographed every room, bagged every piece of paper, and documented everything that might prove valuable to analysts. Meanwhile, outside the compound, Pakistani security forces were beginning to respond to reports of explosions and gunfire.
McCraven watched satellite feeds showing vehicles moving toward Abbottabad from multiple directions.
Cairo, you have Pakistani military approaching from the south.
Expedite your timeline. Copy, Neptune base. 2 minutes. McCraven's team faced a new problem with the crashed helicopter.
They couldn't abandon it intact because its stealth technology was classified beyond the highest levels. But they also couldn't spend precious time conducting a detailed demolition with Pakistani forces closing in.
Cairo, implement destruction protocol for Bird 1.
The SEALs placed explosive charges throughout the downed aircraft while the rest of the team finished collecting intelligence materials. Everything had to be timed perfectly, too little explosive and sensitive technology might survive, too much and they risked damaging the compound beyond repair.
Charges set. All personnel clear. The explosion lit up the compound like daylight for several seconds.
When the flames died down, nothing remained of the helicopter except twisted metal and composite materials.
Bird 2, begin extraction. All packages secured. The second helicopter settled into the compound courtyard while Cairo's team loaded their equipment and the body of their target. McCraven watched Pakistani vehicles approaching the outer perimeter, their headlights visible through the darkness. Cairo, Pakistani forces are 2 minutes out. Get airborne now. Roger, Neptune base. Lifting off. The helicopter rose heavily from the courtyard, carrying double its normal passenger load plus the collected intelligence materials. McCraven tracked its progress on satellite displays while monitoring Pakistani communications through intelligence intercepts. Neptune base, we are clear of Pakistani airspace. Precious cargo secure, all personnel accounted for. McCraven closed his eyes and exhaled slowly. They had done it. After nearly 10 years of hunting, Osama bin Laden was dead and his men were safely heading home. President Obama's voice cut through this celebration in the command center. Admiral McCraven, congratulations to you and your men. Outstanding work. Thank you, Mr. President. The men executed flawlessly under difficult circumstances. But, even as McCraven accepted congratulations, he was already thinking about the aftermath. Killing bin Laden was only the beginning. Now they had to manage the political fallout, analyze the intelligence windfall, and prepare for Al-Qaeda's likely retaliation. The intelligence haul exceeded everyone's expectations. Bin Laden's compound contained years' worth of correspondence, operational plans, and financial records. The computers and documents revealed Al-Qaeda's command structure, funding sources, and future attack plans. More importantly, the intelligence showed that bin Laden had remained actively involved in terrorist operations until the day he died. This wasn't a symbolic figurehead hiding in retirement, but the operational commander of ongoing attacks against American targets worldwide. McCraven spent the next 72 hours in continuous briefings, explaining the operation's details to intelligence agencies, congressional leaders, and international allies. The Pakistani government demanded explanations for the violation of their sovereignty, while American politicians praised the mission's success. The media attention was overwhelming. For the first time in his career, McCraven found himself thrust into the public spotlight. Reporters wanted interviews, military historians requested detailed accounts, and publishers offered book deals. But the attention also brought scrutiny. Some criticized the decision to kill rather than capture bin Laden. Others questioned whether the raid violated international law. A few conspiracy theorists claimed the whole operation was fabricated. McCraven handled the criticism with the same methodical approach he brought to military operations. He testified before Congress, briefed international allies, and carefully managed information release to protect operational security while satisfying public curiosity. The success of Neptune Spear catapulted McCraven into the highest levels of military leadership. He was promoted to head all Special Operations Forces, overseeing not just Navy SEALs but also Army Rangers, Delta Force, and Air Force Special Operations units. Under his leadership, Special Operations expanded dramatically. What had once been a small community of elite warriors grew into a global force capable of operating in dozens of countries simultaneously. McCraven's units conducted thousands of operations during his tenure, capturing or killing terrorist leaders across the Middle East, Africa, and Asia. But success came with costs. The tempo of operations was unsustainable for both personnel and equipment. McCraven watched young operators cycle through multiple deployments, accumulating physical and psychological wounds that would affect them for decades. He also saw the strategic limitations of special operations. They could kill individual terrorists and rescue specific hostages, but they couldn't solve the underlying political and economic problems that created terrorism in the first place. By 2014, McCraven began thinking about retirement. He had achieved everything possible in military service, leading the most successful special operations forces in history. But he was also exhausted from decades of continuous combat operations and concerned about the direction American foreign policy was heading. His final major operation took place in Syria, where his forces rescued an American journalist held by ISIS. The mission succeeded, but it required massive intelligence resources and significant risk to American personnel. McCraven realized that special operations had become America's default solution to complex international problems, often when diplomatic or economic approaches might be more effective. The conversation about retirement began during a private meeting with President Obama in late 2014. "Admiral, you've given this country extraordinary service," the president said. "What are your plans for the future?" McCraven had been thinking about that question for months. "Sir, I believe it's time for new leadership in special operations. The force needs someone who can adapt to emerging threats while I need to find new ways to serve." Obama leaned back in his chair. "Any thoughts on what those new ways might be?" "Education, Mr. President. Training the next generation of leaders, both military and civilian. Teaching them the lessons we've learned about leadership under pressure, teamwork, and moral courage." The president smiled. "That sounds like exactly what this country needs." McCraven's retirement ceremony took place on a warm August day at Naval Amphibious Base Coronado, where he had first trained as a young SEAL officer nearly 4 decades earlier. Hundreds of special operations veterans attended, representing every major operation of the past 30 years. Secretary of Defense Chuck Hagel presented McCraven with his final award, the Distinguished Service Medal. The citation read simply, "For exceptionally meritorious service as Commander, United States Special Operations Command, and for leading the most successful counterterrorism operations in American history." But the words McCraven remembered most came from Cairo, the SEAL who had led the Bin Laden raid. During the ceremony's informal reception, the younger officer pulled McCraven aside. "Admiral, I want to thank you for teaching us that leadership isn't about being the toughest guy in the room. It's about making sure everyone goes home safe." McCraven gripped his former subordinate's shoulder. "Take care of the next generation, Cairo. They'll face challenges we never imagined." As the ceremony ended and guests began departing, McCraven stood alone on the beach where he had first learned to be a SEAL. The Pacific Ocean stretched endlessly toward the horizon, the same waters where he had trained for his first combat mission. Tomorrow he would begin his new career as Chancellor of the University of Texas, trading his Admiral's uniform for academic robes. But tonight, he was still a SEAL, remembering fallen comrades and reflecting on a lifetime spent in service to his country. The blade was about to fall quietly, but William McCraven was ready to rise loudly into whatever challenges lay ahead. Chancellor William McCraven stood before 3,000 graduating students at the University of Texas, his academic robes feeling strange after 37 years in military uniform. The crowd fell silent as he approached the podium, many recognizing the man who had led the operation that killed Osama bin Laden. But McCraven wasn't here to talk about warfare or terrorism. Today, he had chosen to speak about something more fundamental, the simple habits that separate success from failure in any endeavor. If you want to change the world, start by making your bed. The unexpected opening line rippled through the audience. Students had expected war stories or tactical wisdom. Instead, they heard about the mundane task of straightening sheets and fluffing pillows. McCraven smiled at their surprise. "Every morning in basic SEAL training, my instructors would inspect our barracks. If the corners weren't square, if the covers weren't pulled tight, if your pillow wasn't centered exactly, you were ordered to do it again. And again. And again." He paused, letting the image settle in their minds. The wisdom of this simple act became clear only later. If you make your bed every morning, you will have accomplished the first task of the day. It will give you a small sense of pride, and it will encourage you to do another task and another. The speech that followed became legendary, viewed millions of times online and quoted in leadership courses around the world. But, for McCraven, it represented something deeper than viral fame. It was his attempt to distill decades of hard-won wisdom into principles that anyone could apply. His transition from warrior to educator hadn't been easy. Academic politics were more subtle than military command, but often more vicious. Faculty Senate meetings required different skills than planning special operations, though both involved managing large egos and conflicting priorities. McCraven's first major challenge came during his second year as chancellor, when a gunman opened fire on campus. Students and faculty ran for cover as police cordoned off the area around the library.
McCraven found himself managing a crisis that was simultaneously similar to and completely different from military operations.
The tactical response was straightforward.
Campus police had trained extensively for active shooter scenarios, and they executed their procedures flawlessly. The gunman was neutralized within minutes, before any students were seriously injured. But the aftermath required skills McCraven had never developed in the military.
Grieving families needed comfort, not tactical briefings. Traumatized students required counseling, not after-action reports. The media wanted explanations, not operational security.
McCraven spent days walking through dormitories and classrooms, talking with students who were struggling to process what had happened. Many had never experienced real violence before, and they looked to him for reassurance that their world still made sense.
"Chancellor," one sophomore asked during an impromptu gathering in the student union, "how do you deal with being scared all the time?"
The question caught McCraven off guard. In the military, fear was acknowledged but not discussed extensively. Soldiers were expected to manage their emotions and focus on their missions. But these weren't soldiers. They were teenagers trying to figure out how to live meaningful lives in an unpredictable world.
"Fear is useful," McCraven replied after thinking for a moment. "It keeps you alert and focused. But courage isn't the absence of fear. Courage is being afraid and doing what needs to be done anyway."
The conversation continued for hours, with students sharing their anxieties about everything from academic pressure to career uncertainty to global instability. McCraven realized that his role as an educator wasn't just about running a university, but about helping young people develop the mental resilience necessary for adult life.
This insight shaped his approach to university leadership.
Instead of focusing solely on academic metrics, McCraven emphasized character development and practical life skills. He expanded military science programs, not to recruit soldiers, but to teach leadership and teamwork to future civilian leaders. He also began writing seriously for the first time in his life. His memoir, detailing the lessons learned during decades of special operations, became a bestseller. More importantly, it provided a platform for sharing his philosophy about leadership, resilience, and public service. The book tours and speaking engagements were exhausting, but they allowed McCraven to reach audiences far beyond college campuses. He spoke to corporate executives about crisis management, to high school students about setting goals, and to military veterans about transitioning to civilian careers. One speech stood out above all others. McCraven was invited to address the Naval Academy's graduating class, returning to speak at his alma mater 45 years after his own graduation. Standing at the same podium where he had once listened to admirals and generals as a young midshipman, McCraven looked out at faces that reminded him of his younger self. Eager, idealistic, ready to serve their country but unsure what that service would require.
"Ladies and gentlemen, you are joining the military at a time of tremendous uncertainty. The threats our nation faces today are more complex and unpredictable than anything my generation encountered.
You will need new skills, new strategies, and new forms of courage." He spoke about the evolution of warfare, from conventional battles between nation-states to asymmetric conflicts against terrorist networks and cyber attacks from unknown adversaries. But he also emphasized timeless values that remained constant regardless of changing tactics and technology.
Leadership is not about rank or authority.
It's about taking responsibility for the people around you, making difficult decisions under pressure, and maintaining your integrity when no one is watching. After the ceremony, a young ensign approached McCraven during the reception.
"Sir, I want to become a SEAL like you. What advice would you give me?" McCraven studied the young officer's face, remembering his own burning ambition at that age.
But he also remembered the costs of special operations, the physical toll, the family sacrifices, the psychological burden of life and death decisions. "First, make sure you're doing it for the right reasons," he replied.
"Don't become a SEAL because you want to be a hero or because you've seen too many movies.
Become a SEAL because you want to serve something larger than yourself, and you're willing to sacrifice everything for your teammates."
The young ensign nodded seriously.
"Second, prepare yourself mentally as much as physically.
Special operations isn't just about being tough.
It's about thinking clearly under extreme stress, solving problems creatively, and leading others when everything is going wrong. McRaven's influence extended beyond military audiences. Corporate leaders sought his advice on team building and crisis management. His concepts about mission planning and risk assessment were adapted for business strategy courses at major universities. But perhaps his most important impact was on veterans transitioning to civilian careers. McRaven understood the challenges of translating military skills to civilian contexts, having experienced that transition himself. He established mentorship programs connecting senior veterans with recent discharges, helping them navigate job searches, college applications, and the cultural adjustments required for civilian life. Your military service taught you discipline, leadership, and how to work under pressure, he would tell veteran groups. Those skills are incredibly valuable in civilian careers, but you need to learn how to communicate that value to employers who have never served. McRaven also advocated for veteran mental health services, drawing on his own experience with the psychological demands of combat leadership. He spoke openly about the burden of command, the weight of life and death decisions, and the importance of seeking help when needed. Asking for help isn't weakness, he told one veterans conference. It's leadership. You can't take care of others if you don't take care of yourself first. As his post-military career evolved, McRaven found himself increasingly involved in national policy discussions. Politicians from both parties sought his opinions on military strategy, counterterrorism policy, and veteran affairs. He was careful to avoid partisan politics, but he didn't hesitate to speak out when he believed core values were at stake. When political leaders attacked the integrity of military and intelligence institutions, McRaven defended the professionals who served in those organizations. I don't care what political party you belong to, he said during one controversial speech. The men and women who serve in our military and intelligence agencies are patriots who deserve our respect and support, not our political attacks. The statement generated significant backlash from some political quarters, but it also solidified McRaven's reputation as someone willing to put principle above politics. By 2018, McRaven had established himself as one of America's most respected voices on leadership and national security. His university was thriving, his books were bestsellers, and his speaking engagements drew standing-room-only crowds. But he was also approaching 70 years old and beginning to think about his legacy. What did he want to be remembered for beyond the Bin Laden raid? The answer came during a conversation with his wife, Georgianne, who had supported him through 4 decades of military service and civilian leadership. You've spent your whole life serving others, she observed. What do you want to do for yourself? McRaven considered the question carefully. He had achieved everything he had ever dreamed of professionally. He had led the most elite military units in the world, managed a major university, and influenced national policy discussions. But his greatest satisfaction came from mentoring young people, watching them develop into leaders who would shape the future. Whether they were military officers, college students, or young entrepreneurs, McRaven found purpose in helping others discover their potential. I want to keep teaching, he told his wife. Not just at the university, but anywhere people are willing to learn about leadership, service, and making a difference. That conversation led to McRaven's decision to step down as chancellor in 2018, transitioning to a teaching role that would allow him more flexibility to speak, write, and mentor emerging leaders. His farewell address to the University of Texas community drew thousands of attendees, including many who had been influenced by his leadership over the previous 4 years. Leadership isn't about the title on your door or the rank on your collar, he told the crowd. It's about the impact you have on other people's lives. It's about making the world a little bit better because you were here. As McRaven walked off the stage for the last time as chancellor, he reflected on the journey that had brought him from a young SEAL trainee to a respected educator and national voice on leadership. The blade had fallen quietly years earlier, when he retired from active military service. But William McRaven had risen loudly, using his platform to teach, inspire, and challenge others to serve causes larger than themselves. His military career was over, but his mission of developing leaders and promoting service would continue for as long as he had breath to speak and strength to teach. The nation's deadliest SEAL had become something even more valuable, A teacher who could inspire others to find their own paths to significance and service.